Greetings. We are known as Full Call and Andrew Full Stop. We are one of the ministers on behalf of the Goodism Private Earthly Association of Trust. Welcome to the Law Series on Dark Matters.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this, our fourth episode of the Dark Matters Law series. And today we have Andy with us from the Goodism. I've known Andrew for many years now, and he works tirelessly, diligently, and with more heart, I would say, than anyone else I've kind of come across. So, shining his beautiful beacons of facts upon this fake, inverted Shakespearean realm of fictions. Andrew has an unbelievable wealth of knowledge garnered over the last 20 or 30 years, I believe, in dissecting the corrupt fictional legal system, utilising what I call true law and postal mechanics, and of course, the correct conveyance of grammatical structures, which is obliterating corporate policies, codes, and corruption at will. So, Andrew, you truly are a fact in a fictional world, a true man in the True Man Show. So, thanks for coming and chatting with us today.
No, you're very welcome. It's like I said, we support people like yourself, not just because you support us, but because we know that you're on the right path and that you're on the right journey, and you're really making a change in this world for the people by sharing your wealth of knowledge equally, Callie. It takes a lot to come on a show like this because people will judge people. So I take my hat off to you for doing this anyway, and well done.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind. Yeah, I think that's the thing, if you're going to stick your head above the parapet in anything, you have got to be ready to get it chopped off. But I always say that's a bit of a people that do that, if someone's genuinely being disingenuous, but I think you shall know them by their fruits. It's not what we say, it's our actions, isn't it? And I've known Andy. I met Andy a couple of years ago on this journey, and I always say I was blown away by his knowledge. It always makes me smile when you get someone with this wealth and capacity of knowledge, but in a northern accent. And it was like it took more than trying to kind of understand quantum and parse syntax grammar. I think it was understanding, deciphering the Barnsley accent at first, and I was just like, what is this? Who is this guy? Like, and it was it blew my wig off, as I say. But I mean, like I say, I've known you for a couple of years now, and I know what the Goodism is about. But for those that have never heard of the Good, Andy, you describe the Good as a private, unincorporated ecclesiastical association with its own state and dominion. Can you explain for us, exactly what you mean by that and what that means for your members?
Right. So we get either an incorporation where we basically write the name of a company on a piece of paper and we register to the government through one of its arms, such as the company house. Now, we then get a certificate back proving it exists so that we can go and get bank accounts and such things for that incorporation. But an incorporation becomes public and it also has to operate under the 9,500,000 statutes and acts that's out there. So when you get an unincorporation, that's private. And with it not being registered, we're not transferring ownership to any government. We're keeping that as a state for ourselves. So an unincorporation is different to an incorporation because an incorporation, for example, I used to write what were called RAMs back in the day, which is risk assessments and method statements. And you need that part of your package for your incorporation. Now, with an unincorporation, you don't have risk assessments and method statements because it's written in more of a spiritual, which is an ecclesiastical manner. And so you have to write your articles of agreement and codes of conduct in that manner, and no one's going to tell you how to write them. But when you look at unincorporations, there's two different types. There's a private members association, which are quite available for anyone to get off internet, or there's a private association, which you're not going to get anywhere. You have to write yourself. And the difference with a private members association to a private association is the one that's got members written into it has to disclose its members, which means it's not private anymore. Now, it depends which jurisdiction you're in, because if you're in Australia or England, for example, you'd use a PA. But if you're in America, you'd use a PMA because it's got that written into its United States codes. So it depends what jurisdiction you're in for how you operate your unincorporated association. So normally with an incorporation, you have two parties, such like a director and a secretary. But with an unincorporation, you start it with three principal members. Now, with our principal members, on the first minute of the meeting, what we wrote, I turned it into 13 ministers and principal members. And that goes back to biblical picture of Jesus and 12 disciples, which we'll not get into. But it significantly means many things. Now, the 13 for us means that as our own state, we can have our own treasury, for example. So there is a lot of significance and meaning within the 13. So how I'm going to explain it in comparison to government is we've got to look at on the government side that they'll have what they call the Vatican. And when we take the N off and we look at Vatican, then Vatican is the goddess of the underworld. Now, when you've got the Vatican, which is an unincorporated association, it cannot be sued and it cannot sue. Hence, we can't sue the Vatican. So it's got to be an unincorporation, not an incorporation. Otherwise, we'd be able to sue it because it'd have legal standing. So when you look at the Goodism is equally like the Vatican. It's a private association. Now, because we're not legal entities and we can't hold property or be sued or sue, that means that the Vatican now has to create like a master trust to hold its intellectual property, and they're called the Crown. So under the Vatican, you've got the crowns which hold the intellectual property and statutes and acts and so on. Now, under Goodism, we've got a master umbrella trust which holds all our intellectual property of as book of deeds, as constitutions, and so on and so forth. So underneath the Crown now, you have what's called a subtrust, which is your birth certificate. Underneath Goodism, we have subtrust, but they're written in the way of a minute of the meeting. Now, the reason I won't offer a subtrust out under the Goodism is because I'm going to explain now. And there is people out there doing this. So if you look on a birth certificate, there is no title. There is no Mr., Miss, or Mrs. So that means the title must sit in the Crown, not in the subtrust of the birth certificate. And if I assume to be the birth certificate, the Crown will add the title. Now, the title means security interest. So if I get a subtrust out under Goodism, that means we don't title it master trust. And at some point, we could run away with that security interest, couldn't we? So this is why I will not offer a subtrust out under our association. I operate it in a complete different manner. And that is by writing as minutes of the meeting for everything we do. And then what we will offer out is a private individual trust where we've got two packages. It's not just a trust. Normally in the world of trust, public or private, like if you went to a solicitor, you'd just get a piece of paper saying that you've got a trust, and the solicitor would keep hold of that because they're wanting to do probate and inheritance tax, which is up to 55%. So when you look at what we do with our trust, then we don't just give you a piece of paper proving it exists and we keep hold of it. You get to keep your entire individual trust. Now, if we look at a trust like a van from a manufacturer's, the van's going to work, but it's not going to work if we don't know how to drive it. So the most important thing for our trust is not the trust itself. It's the 12-page guidebook, what we've written specifically for that trust, allowing trustees and settlers to continually navigate that trust in the private realm, to be being passed down to trustee, substitute trustee, and so on and so on and so forth. So the biggest part for what I'm saying is that we don't just give a trust, it's a package of 7 complete documents. It's a minute at meeting proving trust exists. It's the trust itself. It's the guidebook showing you how to navigate this. We give a sovereign will, we give a public will, and we now give a document to government, which is written under it's basically the Conveyance of the Settlements Act. Now, everything what gets us into this problem, into their corporate world of statutes and acts, is under the 1925 Settlements Act. Now, so I've got a 10-page notice written part of this package, and if the people want to serve it, they can do, but if they don't want to, they don't have to. Now, what this basically does is it severs your bifurcated trust estate from government and prevents them from attaching a lien. Now, a lien, if we look at it, we split it up, a lien, then they're two different words, aren't they? But when you add them together, it's alien. Now, a lien basically means it's a general foreign interest in something. So if we were to be stupid enough to get a mortgage, for example, the company that we've got a mortgage with would have a general foreign interest in that estate. So when people say aliens is coming, what they ultimately need to understand is that aliens coming is a general foreign interest in something, and that general foreign interest is from Washington DC. It's foreign to this. So ultimately, based on a private association like this, when we've got as master trust and everything in it, we've ultimately got to look at what we call as constitution. Now, we know that you've touched upon this a little bit before, and it falls under what we call a state. Now, a state, when we add the word meant, is a statement, and meant is of the mind, and a state is quite clearly a condition. So when we get a condition, because we've got a state, then that means that we've got a condition. But all conditions have a term with them, and a term and condition ultimately is the contract, which is the constitution. So I don't know if that's explained enough for you up to now, difference between a private association and an incorporation.
Yeah, no, it's good because it's come up recently, this actually, with a few of my friends who work in trust and set up private membership associations. And like you said, there's a distinct difference there. And and it's only something actually I've become aware of recently. You know, every day is a school day, isn't it? And it certainly is, still is for me, absolutely 100%. And yeah, I think the thing is, as well, as I say, but people need to kind of just understand the difference between public and private jurisdictions. And like you say, you've explained that really simply for me. And I know that perhaps there's some people who perhaps don't understand the law and legal perhaps as well as we do. But you know, ultimately, this is about helping people to kind of, you know, divorce themselves from the state, really, and to protect themselves, and obviously to have that support of, you know, a like the good, and have that kind of, I don't say community, because community means authority, doesn't it? But you know, of that association, you know. And you know, it's really important at the moment, isn't it, to kind of move from people from fear into, you know, empowering themselves in these kind of areas. So it definitely made sense to me. One thing I wanted to ask you as well, because we know how important the language is, don't we? And you know, your ability, and you did it there, you know, beautifully with some words, to kind of dissect those words and have, you know, these secret or, you know, deceptive meanings of language.
We've got to look at why, though, haven't we? Because when we look at why do you think people fall under maritime admiralty law? And this is one of the things people don't understand. And why is the principle of 70 years so important? Like, if you look at internal bankruptcy, it's a 7-year period. But when you look at international trust law, that's a 70-year period. And when you look at Vatican City of London and Washington, D.C., it's quite international jurisdiction. So if everything's got a lifespan of 70 years, such like, why did Queen do a job for 70 years before that contract expired and she fully obligated and fulfilled it? Now, why are they not wanting old people here? Because when they get to 70, there's no pension pot for them or no Treasury direct account set up because it's dissolved. So that means who's going to pay these people out? It's coming out of Rish's pocket. They don't like it. So what we've got to look at with this main principle of 70 is they use it in herd immunity as well, 70%. So when we look at significance of 70%, then that is the majority, the herd of the 100%, isn't it? So what we've got to look at is, what percentage of the earth is made up of water, Callie?
Is it 70%?
And there's 21% only been discovered. But when you look at yourself, what percentage of your body is water?
Are we like 99% water? Or is it 70?
70%.
Yeah.
So
70.
if we fall in the majority of the 70%, then that means this is why they consider us under maritime admiralty law of the water, because this is what most of the body's made up from. A lot of people don't understand that. Now, with language, going back to language in our constitution, we've got the gift and ability to connect with ether. We've got no explanation or answer as to why, because it's not about the why, it's about the how, you know, and that's what we need to look at. So we write using 100% of language instead of the 9% what's only given to us. And how I can explain that is that if we look at the shortest language structure in the world, it's called Sandwich Island. And there's only, I think there's 12 or 14 letters to that. So there's not many words you can make from 12 or 14 letters. But when we look at the biggest language structure, it comes from Tataria, and there were 202 letters in that. Well, when you look at the English language, they call it that we've got 26 letters, don't they? But
Yeah.
seven of them are vowels, because there isn't 5 vowels, there's 7 vowels. There's A, E, I, O, U, and then there's Y and M as well. Now, vowels, when you look at Hebrew language, there is no vowels in Hebrew language, because vowels are from ritual and noise, such like E, I, E. So obviously it'd be a bit different to that.
Did that very well.
So when we take them 7 vowels out of 26 letters, we've now only got 19 letters left, and 19 to 202 is about 9%. So we speak using 100% at language, and we only got the ability to do that since watching David Windmillen in 2001. But when we watched David Windmillen in 2001, which we really respect what he did, is that I actually saw controversies in things what he were doing. So based upon that, we got the message to us that what one man can do, so can another. So we just relayed them principles into English language, and now we direct people to the dictionary that we use, which there's Oxford-style English dictionaries used in most of the countries in the world, in some manner. So we like on the association one I've wrote, we write, there's a lot of words that's not in speech marks, and we use the Oxford-style manual and the dictionary for them definition and rule. But there's some words that are in speech marks that's not in that dictionary. So any words that's in speech marks in our documents, we actually write our own definition for them words and give full disclosure and transparency upon it. Yeah. So there's a lot to do with language when you look at it, but is that a good explanation with 7 vowels, 5 vowels, and different language structures?
This is why I love talking to you, Andy, because I'm just going, wow. What was it you said earlier? There was something I went, oh, I didn't know that. Oh, that was it. The Vatican. Obviously, Vati is dog, and it goes to the dog star as well. But Vatican without the end, the Vatica was the goddess of the underworld. I didn't know that. So that's
there's a goddess and there's a god. So there's a god of the underworld and a goddess as well, isn't there? Because everything's in two. Yeah. You never get left without right or up without down.
No, exactly,
And when Pope's on land, is obviously acting in this capacity, but when he goes down into the basement, he's quite clearly in the underworld. And the N on the end of the Vatican, if we turn that round the 90-degree angle, it's a Z, which can represent one of God's itself, can't it?
Yeah. No, well, and as you know, on Dark Matters, that's one of the big things, this decoding of language and legalese, and it's a passion of mine. It's this learn the serpent tongue and use it against them, and it goes quite. I was going to ask you this question, and you kind of covered some of it already, actually. But we know that this, the English language is like this multifaceted kind of construct that they utilize for deception and trickery and coercing, and ultimately, really, statutory raping us into commercial contracts, this spelling. But like you said with David Windmiller, etc., it's got this mathematical interface to it as well. And we know that when we get sent these statements of accounts, for example, from these corporate entities, that the language on these documents, and this is what you do, spectacularly, really, and decoding this uppercase symbolic hieroglyphic Latin text, which is the dog Latin. It'll have algebra on the lowercase, bold, italics, and so on. But we know that they're not stating what definitions or expression of which dictionary is being used to define all this gobbledygook on the page, in it, really. And definitions comes from definitions, the Phoenicians or the phonetics and the sound of language, which are the slave traders of old and black nobility. And it's like, say, from your perspective, like you've covered it, some of it there, really, that the history and the intent of these constructs, and how that framework, how you're basically, from what I always see, we use it against them, don't we? We're observing and being aware of these systems and what they're doing. And like you say, with the paper, with the from the Goodism, and I've got I've still got my book here, from got it here. It's very good.
Three books now.
Like you say, you're stating what definitions you're using. You're stating what dictionary you're defining these things by, and that's the huge difference. They are not. We know there's 2 different grammatical styles on a page. It's 2 different languages, isn't it?
It is, and if you look at Chicago Manual Styles, edition 16, chapter 11, article 147, it states that there is no jurisdiction of 2 languages appearing on one document. Now, if you look at Chicago Manual Styles edition 17, not 16, and you look at page 666, coincidentally, that's where it also tells you about foreign text and language. Now, the City of London uses the Chicago Manual Styles, and America uses Chicago Manual Styles. But when you look at the City of London, city, if you take the Y off, is sight. And in fact, you cite something, but in fiction, you see something. Because, you know, you look at the oceans, it's the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and then you get the Dead Sea, for example. There's everyone calls ocean sea, but it's not. And that's the art of their illusion in grammar to start with. It's by, I mean, barristers are taught to speak adverb and verb only. They don't realise they're doing this, but this is because in a fictional world, you can't add a fact. So one of the first things a judge will learn is no fact.
In a fiction, can you? Yeah.
So one of the first things that a judge learns is no fact or law shall be tried in court. How can you try a fact in a fiction world? And when we look at law itself, well, we know it comes from folk law, L-O-R-E, but they've changed it to L-A-W. And L-A-W in corporate world means land, air, water, as you know. But in the world that we live in, the reality of people, law means that you've agreed upon it. So when we look at Parliament and the certain people in Parliament that agree upon that, well, that's become the law for them, but it's not become the law for us because we've not agreed upon it. Now, when we look at our constitution and our book of deeds, like what you did, and you came and put your poll, your thumbprint, your autograph, your seal, whatever you want to call it, onto that paper, that meant you, by your own voluntary free will, with no encouragement from us, agreed upon that constitution and that state. So that means that you're part of the state of the good and not the part of the state of the United Kingdom corporate entity. And everyone's allowed to become what state they choose. It's written into many different books and codes and rules all the way around the world.
Exactly.
When we wrote this 6 years ago, though, we had to write a 9-stage plan for how you're going to build your own country. And then, like I said, I had to do stage 1 and 2 back to front, because you can't have a private association without people. So when you came, you became one of them people. But we're now on our phase 2. And our phase 2, as we have touched upon, is a private unincorporated ecclesiastical association. It's a master umbrella trust underneath with 34 different intellectual properties, books and different things like that. And then under it is the subtrust, which are our minutes of the meeting, what we write, which you've got to write everything what you do. Even if you're going to fart, you need to do a minute at meeting and unanimously agree upon it. So part of this is really the organisation, what you need within it. And as much as we're not on our own anymore, when we first started 6 years ago, we've now got, including yourself, there's nearly 400 people put the thumb to our books, and it's expanding because all we can ever do to set ourselves above everyone else is be fully transparent and fully honest, because that's how we should be. And this is principles that we need to set for next generation. Now, I proved something at a speech at Cleethorpes on 6th of January this year. Now, normally I speak for 6 to 8 hours on myself. That's just how I speak. But I've got a family with 3 boys, 11-year-old and 12-year-old, these 3 kids are. And they've been really interested in my knowledge and what I've been doing for 18 months now. So I've given them all my books. I've given me trust guide. I give them a lot of information because this is what it's for next generation. And at this speech in Cleethorpes on 6th of Jan, I decided to ask one of the kids to come up and do a speech for me whilst I'm outside of them. So when I started at 11 with no knowledge whatsoever, no internet and no one telling me where to look, we've now got an 11-year-old kid stood up, relaying knowledge just like what we would to an audience about private trust law, private, public, jurisdictions, quantum grammar and all this stuff, which for us is the best speech we've ever done in his life and the biggest progression of our society, because everything we do is about these offspring. And the audience was so empowered and so eyes open at this full call on Lennon full stop speaking that's what we need to do. We've got to encourage these offspring, because this is how we change a world, Callie. And I proved it at that speech because I've just fetched that kid 40 years in front of where I was when I was 11.
And
This
it's
is how
really
we change the world.
when you get our sons and daughters and they're rhyming it off and they know that the facts are not fictions, it's like Lisa and James, you know, who were members of the good. I'm sure, hopefully, they won't mind me mentioning them. And when you talk to Luke and Joe and Evelyn, and I call like they're like the John Connors, aren't they, of the next generation? Like, and if we you know, to actually see them speak it and stand up and speak it as well, and not just speak it, but you know, understand it and understand it, is like wow. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps now. It's such a powerful thing. I mean, I wasn't there at that talk, Andy, but I've certainly seen it, you know, and that's that knowledge, you know, they're members of the good that's filtering down through you, and they're just, you know, it's amazing. They just get it. It's like what you say, that they're channeling it as well, aren't they? It's coming from somewhere else, and it's pure. There's a purity to it, and it's a real beautiful thing to see. But I mean, back to the language. I mean, it's interesting for people, and I think, you know, just simplifying everything that you said, you know, it can sound complex to people, but actually, when you just break it down, it is about this, you know, moving into the private, and like you say, knowing who we are. Knowing what, you know, they're doing with this trickery of language and this deception that that they're having on us, but that, you know, we can counteract that by kind of using it against them in a way, you know, again, learn the serpent tongue and use it against them, and that interpretation of it. And I've got this from the good book, you know. So like if we look at the word interpretation, and I'll put it up down below, I'll put it up so people can see it. So and when we understand that there's these double meanings in parsing syntax grammar, and you don't have to deep dive parsing syntax grammar, you know, I'm a beginner at it, I have that grasp of it, that's, you know, but I get it, and that's enough. So like the in means no, and ter is earth, pre is the past tense, isn't it? Ta is take, T is title, and on is no. You know, and you break down these words like that, and we can understand or stand on. You know, not we don't want to stand under them, but we can kind of understand what kind of gate, how you know, how that grammar is being constructed to enslave us. Really, if we don't, you know, get the true meaning of it, really, isn't it? I mean, I
It
wanted
is,
to
but
talk to you as well. Oh, sorry, go on, Andy.
it is, but we've got to look at that. What you've just broke down, that interpretation, that's 9% at language that we've just broke it down to. So if you look at the sentence underneath it, this is where we put it into a 100% sentence structure. So if we're left just with the word interpretation, we're going to get many. But if we break it down like I do and add into a 100% sentence structure, then it would mean basically without the claim of the Vatican is with the claim of the man on the earth. So we can either be a birther or a man now, and now we know what it means. So there's no more interpretation. Now, when we look at the word life, for example, that's 9% at sentence structure. We've got to add them words in. So life can mean many interpretations, but if we correct it now and say for the lifespan of the contract, now we know what life means, and we know a contract's got an international expiry of 70 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we know that when you know, in their system, in that trust system, that when they do finally kind of, you know, keep them sick and keep them stupid, and you know, they're still accessing those trusts even after, you know, so everyone that's ever been and died, they're still accessing those trusts, aren't they?
Well, it's not that they access them. What it is that it's like a ledger, Callie. So I'll draw it on here. Basically, so you can see there's like a ledger, can't you? There's a left and what's happened there. I can't.
Oh yes.
So
there you go. Got it.
so there's a
Like a
left and a
banking
right on
ledger.
ledger. So when we're all born, ultimately the International Monetary Fund puts £1 million or $1 million or €1 million into your trust account. Well, if you've got $1 million on plus side, you've got to have it equal on opposite. So there's got to be a minus $1 million on that side now. Now, if we're on this minus side because we're acting in the role of the debtor, then that means we're not going to spend anything up until being 18. We're not going to add any debt to it because we're a ward at state. But by the time we've come to 18, the plus side's probably risen to 20 million, 30 million. Now, when we start working and gain an ounce and all things like this, we're only adding to debt side because that's the character of the office that we're in. I can explain that on 3 birth certificate fraud, but that's another conversation altogether.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So ultimately, when we get to 70 and his plus account's gone to 100 million and his debt side, everything in his life, let's just say we spent 20 million and we've had a good life. Well, when we're not here now, they take that 20 million off 100, they take million off for IMF, so there's 79 million left. And all they've got to do is go and look at our gravestone And if there's gravestones in uppercase structure, then that means we've died as debtor and not claimed as a state. So what they do is they can't claim as a state, but what they can do is they can float it back on Securities Commission Exchange in America. And now they can't claim the pot, but any interest created on that, and remember, it's now not million, it's like 70 million. All that money now is in private and not public, and that private money, which is more than public, is spent on all these different things what people talk about on different channels. So if you look at last 100 years, there's more people lived and died in last 100 years than the 65 million people on in this country at minute. So in that manner, there's quite clearly more money in private than there is in public. And this is because people don't know how to claim their estates back. So for us, it's not about claiming an estate back, and it's not about playing a game of Monopoly with United Kingdom that created it. For us, it's about creating his own game, having the 4 principal rules of no harm, injury, loss and fraud, and then ultimately changing a world by getting our knowledge transparently and truthfully out to the next generation, because that's where change is going to be. And I proved it at my speech on 6th of Jan in Mablethorpe.
Yeah. And I should say as well, if you've not seen Andy talk, literally, I mean, hopefully you might come in Dark Matters, but I'll put all the links to the good underneath the chat anyway, so that you can find Andy and find out more about what they do. But honestly, it's better than any David Icke 8-hour show listening to Andy. It's like most people, including myself, go, wow. It's brilliant. But again, and we've got to remove this idea of authority above us, and just to begin to understand, and again, I want to kind of reiterate to people, if this is all sounding a little bit complicated, don't let that put you off for what Andy and the guys and girls do at the good, because you do simplify it for people, and it is really easy to grasp. There's always a little bit of homework, and there's always a little bit of due diligence to do to understand it, but you're doing some really good work over there, and to remove obviously the gouvernail, the men's, the government, the mind control, and I to rule with authority is the AU, isn't it? And the AU is the gold on the periodic table. We get into scripted reality and Logan, and they're mining us for our gold, and they're mining us for our energy, and they're mining us on this sea of time. That's what maritime means. It means sea of time in this jurisdiction. So I mean, I wanted to ask you, I mean, it probably is like maybe deep diving a little bit, but we know that the Vatican and the post matters of old. So this, we know that that's run by the UPU, isn't it? So
no, the Vatican's
the banking system, isn't it? It's like you say, they're playing this game of monopoly, aren't they? And there's this stone or debt to be paid to Rome, but that's what we this debt slavery, really, isn't it, that we're moving ourselves from.
It is, but we've got to look at, again, the Vatican is an unincorporated association that can't hold property such like intellectual property or anything like that. So the postal mechanics and everything, what we're touching into here, is only something under one of the crowns, the master trust, not the Vatican. Now, I'm just rolling a six, so I've sort of lost my train of thought.
I'll jibber jabber on anyway, but yeah, I suppose, like I say, I always say, if we can understand banking and we can just understand that, we just get it. I get their system because that's what it is really, ultimately. It's banking. That's what they're playing in. They're playing in contract and commerce, as well as, the high juice.
Right. What happens is, ultimately, you've got a vessel. Now, there's many types of vessel, and you can call it a vassal because you can interchange vowels, such like if you say son, is it S-O-N or S-U-N? So in that manner, what we start off with is like my blood vessel's a vein and the cargo is the blood. So under postal mechanics, we have the vessel itself, and we have the vessel itself is governed by the Department of Transport.
Yeah.
But that's the vessel is governed by Department of Transport, but the movement of all vessels is governed by the Universal Postal Union. So, like when you look in 1871, I think it were, when the Universal Postal Union Treaty started, well, the first country within that was Hawaii. Now, back in that time in 1871, when they didn't have boats like what we have, they had boats that operated off steam, for example. Well, to get that contract from Hawaii to New York took 3 days. And this is why there's no contract live for the first 3 days of it being sent or written. And it took 3 days for them to obviously write a response, and then 3 days for it to come back. So in law, we've got 3 to 10 days to rebut a document, otherwise it stands as a fact.
Yeah, all right. No, I didn't know that. How interesting.
But if we look at a vessel itself, then if we look at this piece of paper being a vessel, which you can't really see because I don't know what my camera's doing, but
Yeah,
I'm holding a
blurry.
piece of paper up, right? So when we've got a blank piece of paper, that's a vessel. Once we add words upon it, that vessel's now a vessel with cargo. Now, when we add the correct stamp and fee of stamps to it, we've now got a vessel that's become that's got cargo that's now become goods because it's got a stamp on it to a correct value. Now, once we put a special delivery label, we've now got a vessel with cargo of words that's goods that's paid its fee to be transported on postal roads and shipping lanes. But that vessel can't carry itself. It needs what they call someone with jurisdiction. So when we take an envelope to the post office, they, with a corporate stamp, claim control over navigating that vessel to its destination. But if we put our thumbprint over it, then we've claimed that vessel that can't carry itself. But ultimately, the word special, there's only one word that means private in law, and it's special. And this is why it's called special delivery. And it's more expensive for that reason. But when we look
Doesn't
at public...
recorded mean no, Andy? Doesn't recorded mean no delivery?
Well, re in Latin comes from the word without, which means definitely a negative context, meaning no in its basic form. And the word ed is backwards for de, which equally means no in Latin. So we've got a no word of cord recorded. But when we look at the chord is from, well, what do they play at churches?
Yeah.
And this is why everything's built upon church land.
Yeah, of course.
So our jurisdiction of this land is because you've got to look at the word terra, and terra means terrace. Now, there's something called inclusio est unius exclusio ulterius. So it's inclusio exclusio, basically. And what that means is if we include one thing, we exclude all else. So when we look at a birth certificate, for example, as one definition, then a birth includes a stillbirth, so it must exclude everything else like a live one. Now, when we look at terrace, the United Kingdom terrace includes British Isles and Northern Ireland. So that excludes England and all the rest of the world, and doesn't it? So when we're going registering to an office in England that's basically Northern Ireland and British Islands, well, to come back on land in England, we're foreigners now because we come from Northern Ireland and British Isles. So this is why we class as foreigners on land in England in that manner. But under maritime admiralty laws, a vessel's got what they call 12 nautical mile of ocean around it, and there's 1.1 nautical mile to a mile, so there's 13.2 miles around it. And if you look at the island of England, then it's got 13.2 miles around it, its own jurisdiction of water.
Yeah.
So when they come from Northern Ireland, British Isles, for example, and they put their flag onto, I don't know, Liverpool Beach, well, they've got 12 nautical mile around that in their jurisdiction. So all they've got to add is another church and another police station at edge of that, and it extends another 13 mile. And this is why we've got 154 police states, because that's how they claim jurisdiction in England.
Just moving it along in that
12
sense,
nautical
like that.
mile every, And this is how they've claimed this land. But ultimately, we need a license to come on it because we're not from here. We're from Northern Ireland, British Isles. And so
that makes sense. Yeah, and I think that's it. It's all part of that deception, isn't it? And it's really the deception that we play on ourselves as well. This just not being aware of it, and the thinking again that we are this name on a piece of paper. That like we say that your birthday isn't your born day, and just being confused. Like we say, a name doesn't have any energy of its own, does it? It's just as the Monopoly piece can't push itself. The classes, of course, as informants who've surrendered claim. And then they stick us in this kind of principality of Babylon or baby London, the city of London. And really, we've just kind of forgotten who we are. It's like, blah, 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 blah.
We've got to look what a name is. If we jumble words up, we've got amen. If we jumble words up again, we've got a main, which goes down an horse's neck. So when we look at it really in Latin text where it comes from, then a name, a Christian name, is what's called a nomen name, a nomen name, nomen. Now, when we look at the surname, which could be slave you remain or slave I remain, depending, because sir, don't know how I'm saying it, just like son. So when we look at a surname, that comes from not a nomen name, it comes from a cognomen name. So the Christian calling is the energy, and the nomen name is the cog of the machine, and that energy allows that cog to function. And when people look at the saying of money makes the world go round, no, it's not money that makes the world go round, because money can't move on itself. It's the people that allow the money to go round, and it's people that's always been took out of it. So when I go back to what I'm talking about with no fact or law shall be admitted to court, this is where barristers will talk in adverb and verb. So when we look at a judge giving motion upon something, motion of a sentence, we've got to look at what that means. Now, if we look at, for example, the word run, the word run would be the verb, which is like an action or a thought, which you can't hold in your hand as a fact. Then the adverb would be quickly or slowly, for example. So now we've given motion to that run, that word, slowly, quickly. We've given speed to it, motion. And these adverbs and verbs is what the judge is giving motion to pass that sentence, which is words written. But you look at parsing syntax grammar, the word par comes from the word parts, and se in Latin means of speech. So we've got parts of speech. Now we look at syntax. That is the bringing of words together to create a sentence structure. But we'll look at the word grammar, and grammar comes from Latin word grimoire, and grimoire means book of spells.
Yeah. Just like the Gregors and the Gregorians, the Gregors are the demons, and it all goes back to this spiritual element again, doesn't it? I always say, the law is the journey of the spirit. I mean, what would you say on your journey? I mean, you've been at this a long time, for people to kind of get to know you a little better. What's been, when you walked into the courts or the jurisdictions, what's been your, I don't know whether the term is win, but what would you say been your biggest challenge today, like when you've kind of come up against that system? Because obviously we've all done it. I've come up against it and lost. I've had my wins, but what would you say has been your biggest challenge today, other than perhaps trying to get this information over for people to get a grasp on?
Our biggest challenge to date is nothing to do with system, because we weren't born in the system. We were born on this plane of Earth. And instead of our SOLE going on plain Earth, it went on to a plain piece of paper called a born certificate. That were out of our control. We'd got no input into that. So ultimately, there is no challenge for me in the system, because we choose not to be part of it. So we don't claim benefits, we don't work, we don't use that system in any manner. But at the same time, you can't get out of it, because if I wanted to go and buy a pint of milk from shop, they're not going to take a tri-ounce silver coin. I've got to use a banknote. So it's hard to get out of that system fully, but what it means with what we do is we've created a third character. Now you've got the world of commerce, which you can be a birth certificate for, or you've got the world of man and woman, but man and woman can't operate in commerce. So you can either be one or the other. Now, when we created the person's personal representative, which is your good card, now, person's personal representative comes from the Latin word of per curiationem. But we can't write per curiationem, or we've got two languages on his document, just like Chicago manual style says we can't. So we had to syntax per curiationem into what it means of person's personal representative. And this is why we PP everything and not PPR it. So now, with your good card now, full colon Cali full stop can act in the capacity sometimes as Cali Smith, and that means as the person's personal representative. So what it means is, if we look at the game Monopoly, like you touched upon, the dog at the car becomes the birth certificate, which cannot move on itself, can't speak or act on itself. If we become that dog that at that car or that birth certificate, then we're going to pay that tax, or we're going to go to prison or whatever. But if we look at a solicitor like what you used to do, representing people, Callie, you'd never go to prison for someone else in court, would you? Yeah. So if we can represent that character, which is a deceased estate, then we're no longer being it. And that's the purpose of the good card in one sense. But there's 40, 50 reasons why we created that ID card. And we had to really look into the future when we did it. So another principle is basically And this is so unique what we've created is I've created it starts at 96 pages. It's a private trust. It's got 14 documents within it. It's got a continuation of evidence in sentence structures throughout because of page numbers and language what we've used. And then what we've also got in it is we've got to look that, for example, we go and buy an house using a Crown copyright own birth certificate and pay a promise for it. And this is why we can never own it in that manner. But once we put that property into one of my private trusts, we write the beneficiaries as full colon Andrew full stop, and we've got an ID card proving that that man owns that property now. So we've changed it from one realm to another, and we've got capacity to prove it. Now, we can prove that we're Mr. John Smith as trustee and settler, but how do you prove that you're full colon Andrew full stop? We are the ID card, what we created 6 years ago. So the more people move into this private world and move into this, what we're doing, and it's not just a trust, it's a book showing you how to operate this for its continuation and perpetuity for rest of its lifetime for that bloodline. Well, that means the more people go in private, the less there is in public, and soon we're not going to need that government, are we?
Yeah, exactly.
So,
boom.
So I've got two different trust packages because we obviously write in a certain way, Callie. And when I wrote the first trust, it was that book trust, the 96 pages. So we wrote that. Obviously, it's pretty unique. There's nothing else on planet Earth that's got out like to this capacity. But just like as ID cards, when we had that lady come last year, 2 years ago, when that lady came and says, "Look, I weren't born a woman. I was born a man, and I want one of your good cards, but I can't really do it because it would be my man name on the thing." So this is when we didn't want to discriminate. We changed it to a 5-page document, and now they've got an ID which allowed them to change the gender and become that 4-page ID what we normally give out to people. So in trust world, we didn't want to discriminate in the same manner. So we've got a 96-page trust package, but we've also got a 56-page trust package. And why I wrote that 56-page trust package is because I wrote that more in layman terms. It's not written in a correct sentence structure with all definitions enclosed and everything like that. It's written in layman terms for people to get their head around this, because people need to, like I said, it's not just about having a trust. It's about knowing how to operate this trust. And there is no trust out there that gives you a guidebook with it apart from what we're doing. And for us, that's the most important thing, because that knowledge gets passed down in its perpetuity from trustee to trustee to trustee to trustee. And it's one of them now to government, isn't it? And because our property never comes out at trust, because the property never comes out at trust, the trustees just swap round as they're born and they retire, then that means there is no inheritance tax or probate fees because property never comes out at trust.
And like you said about the two ledgers, that's what probate is. If you're in the jurisdiction as the fiction, is balancing the books. That's why estates or your assets go to probate, etc. So it's all about balancing the books on their side. But that's it. We don't need them. We don't want them, etc. and so on. But it's good to have that kind of support. And like you say, it's not just about setting up the trust. It's managing it, isn't it? It's got to be maintained.
Yeah, but how did they balance the books in court? If they're dealing with a deceased estate with no energy, how can they balance the books in that manner? They need to put energy into it. So what happens is, as a judge, like let's just say you came and give us a plea. We're not bothered which way you plea, because plea means that you're a farm animal noise and you've accepted our jurisdiction. So ultimately with that plea now, we're going to serve you to come back to court 90 days later. But what we're going to do is, because anybody can get a birth certificate for anyone's name because there is no likeness upon them, then the judge will apply for birth cert, but birth cert's got no energy. So he'll have to fill in a Form 206 from High Court, which gives temporary life to an estate for a maximum 24-hour period, but it's usually for a court case. Now, when they say all rise, that's when they're putting energy into estate. And then at the end of it, to balance books, they need to put energy in again, so all rise again. But this is putting temporary life into an estate. We've got to look at language again. And there's many definitions for multiple worlds out there. And there's 5,000 languages out there. It's ridiculous how many dictionaries there is. But to make it easy for your audience, I'm just going to say two. There's the Oxford Style English Dictionary and the Oxford Style Australian Dictionary. Now, they've both got the same words in it, and you can duplicate words, but you can never duplicate a definition. So if the definition in English book is this and definition in Australian one is this, then we've got two complete languages that both have got a likeness to each other.
Yeah. Well, that's it. And it's the devil's in all those details, isn't it? I mean, I find it fascinating. I mean, I could listen to you for hours, honestly, because it's like I always learn so much when we do. And for me, it's, I mean, a lot of people are busy, like you say. I think with the good ism, you know, it's not about accessing their trusts or doing anything like that. It's you know, you've set up your own. Whereas obviously a lot of us, we are, you know, some of the work that we're doing, we're playing in equity, we're playing still in the systems with the trust titles and maneuvering them. And there's, you know, it's just like it's something completely different in that sense and completely private because we know that law is just a presumption anyway. You know, that's what it is. 12 presumptions of law. Common, as
Well,
I always say, you know, it's municipal servantry at the end of the day is to obligate and to bind. It's all their system. It's confidence, faith, and belief in the minds of men, really. We don't need it. We can, you know, it's we put
it
our
is,
faith
but
and confidence in something else.
do you mind if I just touch on 3 birth certificate fraud and 6 jurisdictions that's available to them and 3 characters? Because I know you've
Do
touched
it.
upon that on one of your videos, but ultimately, a certificate, a piece of paper is like a game of Monopoly. It's got its own set of rules.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to go into it too depth because you've touched upon it, but obviously the bond certificate is where the character can be the landlord, as you said, over real property. Now, the
Yeah, the bond.
jurisdictions available to that character under gallery at bar is your corporate and commercial jurisdictions. But now we've got a birth certificate. And under that birth certificate, we've not got landlord, we've now got banker because it's not real property, it's personal property. And under
Yeah.
that jurisdiction, there's not corporate and commercial, but there's canon law, common law, and maritime law. And they were all created by bar. So common law is not what we think it is in that manner. It's for the corporate world again. Now,
Yeah.
when we look at the 3rd certificate, it comes under a word called datum. And datum means that once we add a date to an instrument, we create another. So when we go in and record the birth with birth test marriage registrar, we add that date on bottom when we register. It thus creates another document. Now, under this 3rd certificate, we've not got banker and we've not got landlord and we've not got corporate, commercial, canon law, common law, and maritime. We've got now the high priest, and under high priest, the jurisdiction for that is called Talmudic. It's like your Old Testament. Now, when we look
Yeah.
at the word, if we go to a Black's Law dictionary, like, for example, dictionary number 6, and we look at the word human, it'll tell you to move along to the word monster. And in monster, it'll tell you a person, right? Now, when we look at a person being a thing, and why they constitute us as being a thing is because of this. On that 3rd certificate, ultimately, it's linked to our baptismal certificate. Now, ecclesiastical means your SOUL, not your SOLE. Now, if back in the day, for example, if we were christened and baptized, that means that our SOUL has now just been given to Vatican. Well, if you take the soul out of something, it becomes with no energy of its own, just like a lighter, a pen, a chair, or your glasses, or even a birth certificate that can't speak or act for itself. And this is why we call the thing in that manner.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, it's just those small distinctions, isn't it? It's when they're being that high priest of Baal, isn't it? I mean, I was just thinking when you were saying about testament, testes, isn't it? And men of the mind. So it's all to do with bulls, like the Bible, and the bull is the Taurus field, and it's all to do with our energy as well. And I just every time I can't help whenever anyone speaks now, it's kind of like watching films now and picking out, is that a man? Is that a woman? It's like and seeing all the symbolism in the code and every piece of language I'm going, oh yeah, oh yeah, and it ding 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 ding. And I think it's like what you say with you know, I believe, I mean, children is chattel in it, but you know, our sons and daughters, they are the future, and if we can kind of get them knowing who they are, then you know, we're totally
Well,
flying.
chattel's not just children. We've got to understand what chattel means, and it means cattle. So if someone
Yeah,
gets married, then we've got to look at the word husbandry.
marriage, yeah.
Now,
Husband is
what
like
it means. Now,
man's slave, doesn't it? To ban hus is house and band is bind to band.
yeah, but what they're doing is they're not using adverb and verb by creating an action or a thought. They're using adjective and a pronoun is the art of changing what it is into that what it's not. So, such like a man can't admit to
Topic at
court,
the moment.
but a person you can. Soil you can't admit to court, but land you can. The planet, which is the plane of T, you can admit to court, but the plane of Earth, you can't because it's a fact. So it's that change of words. Now, under this husbandry, a lot of people say that they're a living man or a living woman. Well, we can't use that because we've just added something before the word man and changed its meaning into that what it's not. Now, living comes from the word livery. Livery means farming, and farming means cattle, which is EWEU.
You, yeah. And then we get down to the you, who is you, because you is plural, and people don't understand that. It's just a basic grammar point. And a you is a docile female sheep. Meh.
Yeah, there's 7 ways you can spell you. One of them is HUE. HUE means light colour blue. So when we add hue before man, we've now got the colour of man. It's no longer a man anymore.
Like the colour of law, counterfeit, fake.
Well, no longer a man.
The plane of the earth, but like you say, there's the planet or the planet, which is their jurisdiction. The earth is a vessel in the sea of space, which is the Department of Transport, Maritime, etc., and so on, isn't it? The sea is all to do with time, energy, time, and gold. Digging the gold.
It is, but ultimately, where they got this from is we've got to look at Earth itself, and it is suspended in a sea of space.
Yeah, allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Allegedly.
That's a whole other topic that we're talking about behind, but yeah.
I mean, it's just how we. I mean, we've had questions posed to us before. Do you believe in gods, and what do you think gods are? And how we see this, we see this, and how I'm going to talk about this is the problem on this plane of Earth. What we believe, what we're going to set to you now is a creator cannot be part of its own creation. So the planets are being created by the creator for us, which is the space around it, and it can't become a planet because it's the creator of them. So if we look at the planets being the gods and the space around it being the ether, the energy, well, it's obviously imbalanced. Such like when you look at the sun and the moon might look smaller, but it's got to be equal balanced at sun. Because what happens if you get a battery 60% positive and 40% negative? It's just not going to work. So the sun and the moon have got to be balanced in that manner equally. But when we look on planar Earth, is there a balance between man and woman, Callie?
Not at the moment.
And this is what we see as the problem on planar Earth is the imbalance between the people, because women are just as valuable as what men are. There is no difference, and we can't survive without women, just like women can't survive without men. So why do we not treat people equally and create that balance back on planar Earth, which is what we believe to be the problem, Callie?
It's all balanced, isn't it? It's the middle way, as I always say. It is that, there's the in duality reality, we've got, these two sides of it, but it's that pivotal point and finding that balance back with each other, which is obviously why they're hell bent on turning men into women and women to men and injecting, boys with female hormones and vice versa, and all this fucked up shit that's going on out there, and that's why it's so important for people to kind of, get a grasp of this kind of information.
Well, for us, comes from they said that the first trust in the world were created in 1302, and it was called Unum Sanctum. But we can't really look at that because we've got to look at I don't know, Julius Caesar that was before that period. Well, how did he pass on his estate? It's got to have existed before. But what they did in Unum Sanctum is they claimed the entire planet, which is the plane of T, which doesn't exist. Now, until such time man returns or woman returns, they've got that full control of trust of that plane of T. Now, because at the minute there is a capacity for man and woman to return by knowing who they are, well, what happens if you change everyone's DNA to mRNA? Now there's never going to be no claim from man and woman to that. But we've got to look at words again, because like if we look at animals are called male and female. Like a sheep, a ewe would be a male and female. But when we look at people, we are masculine and feminine, but yet they identify us as male and female.
Yeah. Liberate goes back to livestock, doesn't it? And cattle and stock. That's what the stock market is. That's why we have a big bull outside of it. Buy bull, Torsfield, Mithras the bull. You could decode this place forever and ever. And it's like we were saying about, the sentencing, clues in the title again, isn't it? The sentence that, the energy that drives this the words that create, the alphabets and the characters and the fictions and the narratives and the stories. And I mean, I think it's quite important to kind of either express or collapse that trust. Maybe you don't, because like you say, the way how we went through it earlier without repeating, they're using that, aren't they, to human traffic, to drug run, to create a lot of this, the horrors that we kind of are starting to kind of become more and more aware of out there. Do you think that is something that should be done, or do you think it is more important to kind of completely divorce from all that? Because really, you need intention to set up a trust, and they don't really have our intention, not open and honest in the meeting of the mind sense anyway. But or do you think it's just more important to do kind of what you're doing at the Goodism and just completely divorce from it in its
Look,
entirety?
What I think is, and this is because we've been 38 years, we've been on this journey, and no one asked us to be on journey. This was from our self-choice. I mean, we were fortunate to leave school at 11. I mean, it weren't nice for us back then through what happened back then. But as we've got older, we understood that leaving school, it meant that an education for us only is an education when you've forgot what you've learned at school. So it was quite easy for me to forget what I'd learned at school, leaving school at 11. But at 11, for me, there weren't no internet. There was certainly not people talking about this. And there was no direction for you to go in any way. So it ultimately goes back to this gift. Everyone's got a gift. We're all good at something, and all these gifts are equal. Now, if our gift is the ability to connect to ether and get this type of knowledge, we know that that's only one part of the puzzle. And we know that 2 hands is better than 1 pair of hands, and 4 is better than 2, and so on. And this is why we're evolving into his own state in that manner. So if I were to play their game, Callie, I wouldn't be able to build this game. Now, what's important for us is, do we want to play a game where there's 3 characters and 6 sets of rules? Or do we want to play a game where everything's transparent, there's 4 laws, and there is no deceit in it? So this is how we change a world. And I proved it at that speech, like I said, through that next generation. And this is our journey, is the offspring. But when I started out, I can't go knocking on nursery schools and schools, do you want to learn this? It's going to the adults. And normally offspring love the parents. So when we've got parents on board, now offspring are equally going to be on board. So now to see this journey go through when we started from 6 years ago, and have an 11-year-old kid coincidentally at the same age as when we started, come now and relate knowledge that took us all these years to understand. That is the most important part of my journey, and best challenge for us, answering your question, was getting to that point, Callie. Nothing to do with system. Our journey's fought better at offspring and people on this planet Earth with something what we created, not what some fictional evil fuckers created many years ago, which we don't even know, because history is always a fucking lie. I don't believe none of it.
Well, and that's a perfect note to kind of end our awesome chat on, really, because it is that. I think that's what that true Edenic state is. We are the creators. They can't create. They need our energy. They need to siphon us. We don't need them. And like you say, with the offspring. I mean, I always mention Evelyn and Luke and Joe and Lisa and James. I mean, what a beautiful example of this in action. I didn't have, like I said, I wasn't at the talk when you gave it, but yes, that is, it's literally that. And their fictions and their narratives and their hijacking of our conscious and all their bullshitting games, and that's why the Goodism is such a beautiful thing, and genuine, real genuine, beautiful souls over there. I love you guys, and I've not met everybody, but I'm hoping to maybe show my face a lot more this coming year, 2024, if you believe it's the fake new year or not. It's gonna be a wacky one, I think. So certainly, go and check what the Goodism do. You will not be disappointed, and it's really accessible for people as well, which is brilliant. You're not out to kind of the really pure souls there, definitely.
We've got such a good team, Callie, and we include you as part of this team. Because the biggest part of what I chose personally when I started this is the integrity of the people, and so we've got real integrity in what we do, and we include that with you. I want to thank you for allowing me space on your show, Callie, and I just want to say that it's really fantastic what you do. I support you in all manners, and I really would will you to continue in this journey. If you want to equally come back and have a bit of time on good, then that's really good for us. But I've just got to be honest, as much as I wrote this and created it 6 years ago, and we're only on phase 2 out of phase 9, well, I only wrote it as a foundation because ultimately not wanting to be a dictator, it's now for people to build upon. Now, so I'm only equal in that association as to anyone else, including yourself, and I think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
But it's the integrity where we've got in people, and we've got 7 hubs set up in country now for people to go and access, like Milton Keynes, Westminster, Grantham, Hull. So there's Barnsley. So we have got quite a lot of foundation for it, but I've never felt part of anything, me, Kelly. And me growing up as a young'un, not all the abuse and torture and things what we had in his childhood, but we always felt like there was something wanting to bust out. And I could never speak about my knowledge for most of my journey because even my own family had tortured me and bullied me, even at 9 and 10 years old, for saying things that they just thought were completely ridiculous. So I had to learn to become a different character and hide that knowledge and pretend to talk about football that I can't stand and all this bullshit just to fit in with my own family. But I've evolved since then. And as much as I was pointed when I was younger that you'll never be this, you'll never be all that and all stuff like that, from age of 17, every single member of my family has always come to me for advice. Now, the abuse and that I have from my family as a young'un, I've never ever spoke about it since because we've got nothing to answer for. These have got something to answer for. And this is why I'll never speak about that, because this is their journey, not ours. Our journey, whatever happened, only allowed us to understand the difference between good and bad, which now we made a choice upon. So I've never felt part of anything in that manner until I wrote and created this. And now I'm not on my own, and I'll never be on my own, because we've got nearly 400 people on the same page, including yourself, Callie. And that again is not just a challenge, but it's one of the wonderful things is what we've got is that we've got commitment and integrity of people that believe that what we're saying and what we're doing is actually honest, transparent, and true.
Yeah, and I can second that because I've seen it in action, and I absolutely do second and third it. You're a force, Andy, a legendary one, and the work that you've done is absolutely, it's outstanding. And I'm not just saying that, I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. It genuinely is. And if, like I say, if you can join one of the hubs, or you're interested in knowing more, go see Andy talk. Honestly, it's brilliant. And yeah, thank you so much for spending some time with us, and it's been illuminating as ever. And we'll perhaps have you back and do a part 2. We'll deep dive some more stuff. It's been awesome. Thanks very much, Andy.
No, you're very welcome. But in this world, we've got to support each other, and we can't look at money because that weren't created by us. We've got to look at our voluntary own actions and free will. So your voluntary free will coming on this show and ours coming on it. Look at frequency and vibration that we're going to resonate through the YouTube just by doing it. And this is the change.
Yeah, well, that's it, innit? It's cheesy, but we've got to be the change you want to see in the world, innit? We've got to put our foot forward. And I don't mind sticking my head above the parapet and getting it chopped off because I know, like, I do it from a purity of heart for the greater good. Not trying to make a speech here at the end, but it's true, innit? It's true. So awesome, brilliant.
Well, there is bad out there, but we're quite clearly the good.
Yeah. And on that note, that's perfect. Thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.